Hello students, welcome to our second lesson on the course Introduction to Conflict Resolution Processes 1. I'm your facilitator and my name is Antonia Okoye. The focus for today's lesson is going to be on what is conflict resolution, how is it applied, why is it applied, where is it applied, and who applies it. And I hope at the end of the lesson, we will come to a better understanding of its influence in all that we do. So as I said, our topic for today is insight into conflict resolution and processes. And we have three objectives, which are: the first is to explain what conflict resolution is. The second is to explain conflict resolution processes. And the last is to look at conflict resolution approaches. But before we start, we are going to do a little recap on our last lesson. And I can remember that our last topic was on conflict. That's understanding the concept conflict. So doing a little recap is very necessary because it will take us into the next topic for today. So I will try to recall what conflict is. And in our last lesson, we said conflict is a situation that affects an individual or a disagreement between two or more persons over incompatible goals, their ideas, interests, values, ideologies, which, if not quickly addressed, can lead to destructions and ultimately death. And how does this conflict affect a society? It can affect a society positively or negatively. So if it is not handled immediately and precisely, it can lead to destruction. So, which brings us to today's topic, which is what is conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is the process of managing a conflict and negotiating a solution. That is the various methods that are available of settling conflict between parties that are or that's opposing parties in conflict. But there are two distinct elements that are operative during a conflict situation or conflict resolution process, and they are management and negotiation. The first one, which is management, actually takes care of the temperature around the situation, or around the conflict situation. In a conflict situation, you see people arguing, tempers are flaring, people are abusive, they are angry with each other. So the first element in resolving a conflict situation is to first manage this temperature, cool it down. Then the next element is negotiation. And negotiation is actually where parties in conflict try to, settle their differences and negotiate an agreement, you know, and negotiate an agreement, an outcome that will be favorable to all of the parties in conflict. So our next objective now is to look at the conflict resolution processes. We have several conflict resolution processes, and they include negotiation, mediation, arbitration, conciliation, independent expert inquiry, diplomacy, litigation. And all these conflict resolution processes that have mentioned, aside from litigation, they are all called alternative dispute resolution. So for this our lesson, we are not going to go into detail on each of them, but in subsequent lessons, we are going to look at negotiation, we are going to look at mediation, we are going to look at arbitration, just like that for each one of them. But for this particular lesson, we are just going to look at them briefly. So the first one is negotiation. And we know negotiation is the first step in conflict resolution. This is a situation where parties in conflict will try to, solve their problems by themselves without a third party. They decide to come together. For the picture I have here, you see parties in conflict trying to, cross a bridge, try to close the gap between each other, trying to solve their problem. It does not require a third party intervention. They themselves, will make up their mind that we want to solve our problems by ourselves. And this can happen by them, hiring an attorney, or they can decide to do it by themselves. If they feel that they cannot negotiate very well, they can decide to hire an attorney who will stand in their stead like a proxy. The attorney is not standing as a third party. He's just there as if he's the party in conflict that is just representing the party in conflict. So, and this negotiation can happen anywhere. It can take place in anywhere. As far as the environment is conducive, it can happen in your living room, it can happen in a boardroom, it can happen anywhere that is convenient. The next conflict resolution process we'll be looking at is mediation. And we know mediation is a process in which an impartial person helps with communication and promotes reconciliation. What is so beautiful about mediation is that it is the next step after negotiation. When people have first, try to resolve their problem and it's not working out, then they may want to consider another process of conflict resolution, which is mediation. So this mediator may come in now to help them to, arrive at a mutually acceptable agreement. His work is just to be neutral. He will try to set the meeting. He will try to be amiable, he must be friendly. They must see him as somebody who is not partial, and his purpose is just to reconcile them. He does not impose himself. He does not impose any agreement on the parties in conflict. His own main purpose is just for them, especially where there's no communication, he tries to bring them together to communicate and try to solve the problem. So why do we mediate? There are several reasons why we mediate. We mediate because the cost is cost effective, unlike litigation. It's not formal, the atmosphere is usually very friendly. You have a neutral expert in the midst of the people to try to solve their problem. It is very flexible. It allows everybody to, to have their to come in at their own convenience, to arrange the meeting at their own convenience, or litigation where the time is specified and they must be at that meeting at the exact time. There's confidentiality also in mediation. So another thing that we need to understand about mediation is that the decision reached is not binding, except before the start the process. The parties have agreed that whatever we agree upon will be binding on us. But if they did not agree upon that, the decision arrived at may not be binding on the parties. They may decide that, okay, I'm not satisfied with the decision anymore. Then they may decide to seek other methods of conflict resolution. The next conflict resolution process we are going to look at is arbitration. Arbitration is where parties in conflict will decide, okay, we want to submit our problem to a third party, an impartial third party, and this impartial third party is almost like a lawyer. You understand? The only difference is that this one is actually done out of court. Arbitration occurs out of court. And this person, also like a judge, decides the case. And the decision here, the agreement reached, is always binding. So if you know you are not ready, that's the clause to arbitration. If you know you are not ready for arbitration, don't submit to it. Immediately you submit to it, the agreement becomes binding. The next conflict resolution process we are looking at today is conciliation process. This conciliation process is so similar to mediation in that it's also an independent third party who tries, to settle the differences between people. This one is also so wonderful. The decision here, the agreement here, here always leads to a win-win outcome, because the people themselves decide their their outcome. The only what the conciliator actually does is just make suggestions to them. Okay, this is why don't you look at issues this way instead of being rigid. When people are in conflict, they tend to be very rigid. This is what I want and this is what I must achieve. But that's the work of a third party, a third party intervener. He will decide, his own purpose is just to make them shift their position, that's their rigid position, and make them to see other options that will be okay for them. So that's the work of a conciliator, which is similar to a mediator. And this person can be provided by the state or private person. That is, a private person can decide. Probably you see your friends that are in conflict and you can decide, okay, I want to help them to negotiate a problem. But they must accept, they must agree that, okay, you come and help us to solve this problem. So you cannot just come in and impose yourself on the parties in conflict. The next one is litigation. This is the most familiar type of conflict resolution that people are familiar with. It involves, a defendant, facing off against a plaintiff before a judge, or a judge and a jury. The judge and the jury is the one who decides the ruling. He makes a ruling, and this ruling is binding. This usually leads to a win or a lose outcome. One person will win and one person will lose in litigation. That is the outcome of litigation, and it's usually lead to loss of friendship. People will not talk. They said after court there is no more friendship. If anybody takes you to court, that ends the relationship. The next conflict resolution process we are going to look at is independent expert inquiry. It's the conflict resolution process that is usually commissioned on a fact-finding mission on the root causes of a particular conflict with a purpose of arriving at a recommendation. Usually this one is also a third party intervention in a conflict situation, but this one is usually commissioned by an organization or a state, and they will commission a group of people or a group of people to go and look at the root causes of a particular conflict and try to make recommendation, which the people who commissioned it will now take necessary actions. The last conflict resolution process we are going to look at is this diplomacy. It's simply putting, it's a process that's usually employed to resolve conflicts between sovereign nations. So when countries are in conflict, the way to resolve the problem is through diplomacy. And what they do after they come to an agreement is to sign a treaty, and have diplomatic ties. And you notice immediately that they are in conflict, the first thing they do, they break off the diplomatic ties. And first evidence of this is that they will be withdrawing their embassies from the other party's country. So diplomacy is very important in world peace. So now we are going to look at conflict resolution approaches, and we have several, because we don't normally react the same way in every conflict situation. So we have several ways people react in a conflict situation. The first one is forcing. This is commonly also known as competing. This is when somebody wants to impose his own will, upon others. And this works in two ways. The other party too can use forcing. That is, you use it to resist the other party who want to impose himself on you. So forcing works in two ways, for the person who is imposing and the person who is resisting. The next one is collaborating. This is considered the best form of conflict resolution, where people, we come together and solve their problem. It is also known as problem solving. This is regarded as, the best conflict resolution approach. The next conflict resolution approach we are going to look at is compromising. Compromising is a situation where you just want things to be okay. You compromise your own values, your things that are very important to you. You just decide, okay, just for peace to reign, okay, I give in to whatever you want. But this is not the best approach, because you are just pushing the evil day. Because if that thing is very valuable and important to you, definitely one day you come back and revisit the problem. The next conflict resolution process we are going to look at again is withdrawing, which is also known as avoiding. You know, some people have this behavior when things don't, they don't just want to join issues with people. They will just look for ways to avoid the problem, and this is not a good way of, you know, approaching problem, because all you are doing is you are just sweeping the dirt under the carpet. One day it will turn to a heap, and one day you will react, you go back to forcing again. So the last conflict resolution approach we are going to look at is smoothing. Smoothing is also very similar to compromising, because smoothing also does not, you don't look at your own interest, you don't take it first, you take the interest of the other party first. But this one can work a little where what the other party is seeking for, you consider it that is not very important to you, so you can let go and let the person have their way. But one bad thing about smoothing is that people may, you know, probably take you for granted. That's where you see people, they take them for granted. You hear people say, "Yeah, well, that one, whatever I say to him, he will take." So it's not a good conflict resolution approach too. So we have come to the end of the lesson, and we have been able to look at conflict resolution processes and approaches, and we have been able to establish that conflict resolution skills are necessary skills that everybody needs to, you know, negotiate a positive outcome for yourself and for your interest. So, we are at the end, as I've said. If you have any question, you can please ask the question. Any question or any contribution from anyone? Okay. In the absence of none, please don't remember to do your comprehensive test and comprehensive exam tonight. So I will see you next in next lesson. Have a great day.